Hi folks, Tony from Tacoma, Washington. Today I'd like to talk to you about a discovery that I recently made using my Lansky sharpening system on how to set more accurate hone angles than I ever have in the past. Now we all want a really sharp knife, and the Lansky is a great low-cost system that accomplishes that. Here's how sharp this knife got with just 600 grit honing stone using the Lansky. Today we want to talk a little bit about the Lansky sharpening system and how to set proper angles with the Lansky. From the factory, the Lansky comes with 4 adjustment holes that control the hone angle to your blade. The first hole is labeled at 17, then 20, 25, and 30. And the question is how to use those holes to set the angle that you've chosen for your blade using the Lansky. If you'll look, the Lansky is basically a right triangle, and the hone angle is controlled by controlling essentially a triangle. So you have a right angle, and then you have a distance between the edge of the device and the backstop, and that creates a triangle. And if you remember from high school math class, when they were forcing us to learn about cosines and sines and tangents and how to calculate right angles, this all comes into play. And so the first thing that we've got it set up here right now is we have it set at a 17-degree hole. But when I actually calculated the distance between the backstop and the edge of the mount device, it calculated out to about 14 degrees. Now what that means is the sharpest angle that you could have using that lowest hole is 14 degrees. Now I know that it's labeled 17, but mathematically it doesn't come out to 17, it comes out to 14. And that would be 14 degrees right to the edge of the device. But what happens as you move the grinding hone out, the angle actually becomes less and less. So if you had your blade clamped in here and your blade stuck out a ways, the further your blade goes out past the edge of the mount, the less the hone angle is. So if you could sharpen right at the edge, it would be 14, but as you move out, it gets less and less and less to 13 to 12 to 11 and so forth right on down. So it's labeled 17, it doesn't work out that way. And I'll show you that. I've disassembled the device and I've put it in a protractor, and you can see that it's closer to 14 than 17. And we'll go through all the holes and determine what the presets actually represent, and then how to adjust this distance to get the angle that you're looking for. Now, a couple things I want to point out is that we're talking about really right angle calculations. And again, as this distance increases, the hone angle decreases. So if this gets longer, the hone angle gets reduced. So let's say that you're starting out and you're honing at 14 degrees. If this distance increases, the hone angle decreases. So as you start to hone further and further away from the base, the hone angle gets less and less. So that's true at the right angle at the mount, but it's also true as you use the device and you move the hones further to the side. To either side, the hone angle will start to reduce. So what I'll show you is a way to go online and find a angle calculator that makes setting up the Lansky extremely simple and much more usable than it's ever been for me in the past. And all it comes down to is knowing these preset heights and the distance. So if you have a ruler and you can measure between this edge and your blade angle, you'll be able to set the Lansky to whatever angle you find most appropriate. And here's a quick chart that shows you how that works. Basically what you're interested in is the information in yellow and blue, which shows that for each hole, what the hone angles would be for a given distance. Okay, let's get started by just taking the mount device and laying it against the backdrop of a protractor and then measuring along the straight edge to see what the hone angle actually measures against the protractor. And looking here, now keep in mind that I've got the hone on the device upside down. So if you were actually using it and honing it, the hone would be completely opposite of what it is. It would be it's upside down. So to read this, we need to read along the edge that would be doing the grinding, which is the bottom edge. And so if we look at the bottom of the guide rod, what we can see is that it's looking like it's about 15 degrees. That's actually just a camera angle. When I squared my vision up and read it, it was actually reading about 14.5 degrees. So we can see that the hole that's labeled 17 degrees is actually about 14.5 degrees when compared against a protractor. And here's the second hole, the 20-degree hole as labeled on the Lansky, and reading across the protractor on the bottom side of the guide rod, we can see that the angle is actually closer to 18 degrees. And here's the third hole, the 25-degree hole on the Lansky. Again, I have a bad camera angle here, but when I squared up my vision and read correctly, it was reading about 22 to 23 degrees on the protractor. And now the fourth hole, the 30-degree hole, is reading about 27 degrees against the protractor. So we can see that on all four holes, the actual protractor measurement is about 3 degrees less than what the Lansky is representing. Okay, so let's look at an even more accurate way to measure those angles. The first thing I did was I did a Google search for an angle calculator, and I just chose one. Several came up, and I chose actually a couple just to compare them. And they all work basically the same, and they work on the principle that if you have a couple of known sides to a triangle, that you can calculate the rest of the angles. And of course, in this case, what we want to solve for is angle A, which would represent our hone angle. And so by simply putting in the measurements of the Lansky mount, we can calculate what those hone angles would be. And I'm going to take you later in the video through how I measured to get the hole heights and the distances, but I just roughly filled them in right here. And what it shows is that the angle A, which would be our hone angle on the very first hole, is 14.2 degrees, even though Lansky is representing it as 17 degrees. And here's another example of another angle calculator. And I just filled in the same numbers. It works the exact same way. And again, the angle represented by the measurements taken off the mount come out to 14.2 to the first hole, even though the Lansky is labeled at 17. And again, I'm just showing here that you can use any of these angle calculators that fit your preference. They all work the exact same way. Okay, so here I am measuring the height to the first hole using my dial caliper. And this was trickier than it seemed. I initially thought that it was 0.915. Later, after some trial and error, I settled on 0.930 as the height to the first hole. So there's a little bit of a trick in getting the exact measurements, but I feel pretty comfortable that 0.930 is pretty accurate. And here I am measuring the second hole. Again, I came out with 1.225 inches. And the third hole I measured at 1.550 inches. Okay, and the height of the top hole, the 30-degree hole, I measured at 1.875. Now, these measurements are only important to you so that you can easily plug these heights into your online angle calculator. That makes setting the Lansky hone angles as simple as can be. Okay, so here's a recap of the measurements to the hone angle holes on the Lansky. The bottom hole is 0.930. The second hole is 1.225. The third hole is 1.550. And the top hole is 1.875. The other measurement that I have here is the distance from the backstop, the edge of the Lansky where the angle holes are, to the very tip of the mount where you would mount your blade. And that distance is 3.615, and you can use that as a starting place. But as we'll see, we'll actually set that distance to the edge of our blade, not the edge of the mount. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so now we're going to use the online angle calculator to actually set the bevel on a new knife that I have. I just bought a CRK Sebenza, and I want to sharpen that knife for the first time. And I want my hone angle to be exactly 18 degrees. So I initially put the knife in the Lansky mount, and I just basically measured. And what I found was that with the blade in the mount, I basically could adjust the mount so that my distance to the blade edge could range anywhere from about 3.7 inches all the way up to about 4.5 inches. So what I wanted to do was find a calculation that would work somewhere in that distance range between 3.7 and 4.5 inches that would get me an angle of 18 degrees to my blade edge. And what I found was that in my case it was exactly 4 inches. Now what you'll see is that I set the height to the hole I was going to use, and I'm going to use the second hole, and the second hole's measurement was 1.225, but I actually set the calculation to 1.3 inches. So why did I do that? Well, I did that to compensate for the thickness of the blade. My blade is 0.125 inches, and I wanted my hone angle to be centered exactly in the middle of the blade. So I needed to add the blade thickness to the distance to the hole on the Lansky that I was using so that my angle would come out the most accurate. So again, my blade thickness was 0.125. I divided that in half, which was 0.0625, and I added that to the height of the second hole, and the second hole was 1.225. That total came out to 1.2975, which I simply rounded to 1.3. Now I know this sounds a little complicated, but truthfully, when you start measuring yourself and add these numbers into the online angle calculator, it really is simple, and it'll all come together for you. Again, it'll make using the Lansky more accurate than you've ever used it in the past. Okay, it's time to start setting up the knife into the Lansky. So I know that I'm going to use the second hole, the 20-degree hole on the Lansky. I'm going to set my distance to the blade edge at 4 inches, and that combination of using the second hole at 4 inches is going to yield me an 18-degree hone angle. So the first thing I want to do is put my knife in the Lansky. And of course we know that once I'm through honing it for the first time, in the future, I'm going to want to repeat that process and hone it exactly the same way again. So one of the things I want to do is take some notes on exactly how I'm putting my knife in the Lansky base so that I can put it back in the base the exact same way every time. And the first thing I'm going to do is just take a measurement to where I'm putting the knife in the Lansky in relationship to the spine of the blade, of the back part of the blade, just to make sure I can get it back there the same way every single time. And I'm just measuring here 1¼ inches is what I found to be centered well, which keeps the blade angle very consistent on the edge of the blade. Okay, just a quick double check to make sure that I have my knife mounted in the Lansky mount the way I want it. I want it about 1¼ inches from the handle as shown previously, and I want the distance from the mount to be 4 inches, which yields me an 18-degree hone angle. Here we go. And these are the two stones that I generally use in sharpening my knives. I use a medium diamond and I use the fine diamond. I believe the medium diamond is about 280 grit and the fine diamond is about 600 grit. And these two stones basically do all of my sharpening chores. Unless I've got a badly damaged blade or I need to reprofile, then I might use the coarse diamond. Okay, so here we are skipping ahead toward the end of the process. I've already used the medium grinding stone, and it only took just a few strokes. What I discovered was the CRK Sebenza comes from the factory with about an 18-degree hone angle. So with just a few grinding strokes, I was able to reestablish that 18-degree angle and prepare the blade to move on to the fine diamond. And here we are finishing up with the fine diamond. It only takes a few strokes to grind the edge to 600 grit, and then we're finished. So let's take a look at how well that bevel came out. Notice the blade from the tip all the way to the handle is a very good looking, very consistent 18-degree angle. We accomplished this really pretty easily with just a few grinding strokes between the medium diamond and the fine diamond. So let's see if this blade actually is as sharp as it looks. Well, okay, that 600 grit stone seems to be slicing through this phone book page pretty darn easily. Now, we could make the knife cut paper easier if we refined the edge further from 600 grit to 1,000 grit or 2,000 grit. But for me, the 600 grit stone is about the most appropriate for most of my cutting tasks. Okay, that's my video. I hope this helps you establish the angles that you're looking for using your Lansky, and I hope you enjoy a good sharp knife in the future. Take care.